I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. We're starting tonight with a report that I gotta warn you, may just make your blood boil. It's about a wealthy landlord and a low-income tenant and deplorable living conditions. And it's about a law in the state of Washington that apparently makes it all completely legal. That's our big story tonight. As journalists, we often take you to places you normally would not go, but this next story involves a place you probably should not go. In Vancouver, a low-income renter lives in squalor. There's a hole in the ceiling of her mobile home and no working toilet. The water's been shut off for weeks. There's mold, mildew, and a smell that's just overwhelming. But as bad as the conditions may be, there's no way to force the landlord to fix the property and make it decent. That's because there's a loophole in the state law. Here's investigative reporter Kyle Laboshi.
Unit number 61 at the hidden RV and mobile home park north of Vancouver is a place that Casey Jewell calls home, but there's nothing charming about it.
Think people should be living in these kind of conditions?
No. Nobody should be living in this.
The place is falling apart, and no one will fix it. There's a hole in the kitchen ceiling.
Because when it rains, it drips. It's like on all these buckets.
She has no working stove, and the cabinets look like they're about ready to fall.
I had food all in here before this happened, and it all got destroyed because the water got into there. So I had to throw all my food out.
When we visited in late January,
Nothing.
Casey hadn't had running water in 2 weeks.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So
Management shut off water during a cold snap, she said, and never turned it back on.
So I mark it every time.
Casey's toilet stopped working months ago, and the drain in the tub spills straight to the ground. The only warmth comes from a small portable unit, because the heater, it's broken too.
It's gotten worse.
It's unlivable.
Casey's 22-year-old son, Charlie, has started sleeping at his girlfriend's place. He just can't bear the conditions anymore, or the smell.
Like a pungent mold smell. It's not as bad in like cold condition, but when it gets warm outside or hot, it gets unbearable in here. It's hard to breathe.
Charlie has tried to help by patching holes and draping a tarp over part of the roof, but he could only reach so far, fearing he'd fall through it. Charlie and his mom have complained to management repeatedly about the mobile home, which they rent. They don't own the unit. They've sent emails and taken photos to help document the problems.
Should they be fixing this property?
They don't want to. They should, but they don't want to.
And on top of that, the rent is going up. A notice taped to Casey's fridge warns that monthly rent will soon go from $925 to $950. As it is, Casey admits she's barely getting by, working part-time at Fred Meyer.
It's frustrating, but I have to tell myself I have nowhere else to go. I have no money to go anywhere else. I don't know what to do anymore.
Don't people have a right to safe, livable conditions?
Yeah, actually, in Washington, that right is express. It's statutory.
Carl Snodgrass of Northwest Justice Project explains Washington's Landlord-Tenant Act requires landlords to maintain their property or keep premises fit for human habitation. Things like electrical, plumbing, and heating have to work. But buried in that same law is an exception.
So if you're behind on rent in Washington State, you can't force your landlord to make necessary fixes.
Right. Yes. Yeah. If you're behind on rent, you basically have a right to habitable housing that you have no way of enforcing.
Which is where Casey fits in. She fell behind on rent a couple years ago during the pandemic. She's been on a payment plan, $50 a month on top of her normal rent, but she still owes, and frankly, may never catch up because management tacks on late fees.
Under the way that the law is written, being on a payment plan does not count as being current on your rent.
Which means there are no consequences for the landlord. they can ignore repair requests for tenants who are behind on rent.
It's frustrating because I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Because I owe money to this company because I was late on rent.
So, who is this landlord? Hidden RV and Mobile Home Park is owned by Michael and Denise Werner, according to corporate records. The Vancouver couple owns RV In-Style Resorts, title sponsor of the Clark County Amphitheater in Ridgefield. Records show they also have a convention center, investment company, and own and operate dozens of mobile home and RV parks across Oregon and Washington. In December, the Werners made headlines after a judge ordered the Vancouver couple and their companies to pay $926,000 in penalties for unlawfully issuing eviction and utility shutoff notices at an Owako mobile home park. According to the Washington Attorney General's office, the Werners refused to keep the Beacon Charters and RV park clean, allowing a rat infestation, piles of garbage, and feces-smeared bathrooms. In court records, the AG's office wrote, Michael Werner stated he does not believe the law applies to him, and Denise Werner described the Beacon residence as filth. KGW tried to reach the Werners for comment in person, by email, and through their attorneys. We gave them a week to respond. They never did. Public records show the Werners own a $1.8 million home on the Columbia River and have a pair of mansions in Arizona, including this hilltop property currently on the market for $7.4 million. It's a far cry from the squalor that Casey has been living in.
I'll go anywhere right now. If it's a tiny little home, just for us, you know, with the working bathroom, I'll be happy.
Because unit number 61 at the Hidden RV and Mobile Home Park is no place to call home.
Nobody in their right mind should be living in this at all. Nobody should be living in this.
Kyle's with me now, and wow, I gotta say, that is one of the most disturbing stories I've seen in a long time, and I really hope there's a lawyer out there who can bring a little justice to this. Is there anything being done that could change this law?
Yeah, there's legislation before the Washington State Legislature right now that would address this very issue.
Oh.
It's come up before, though, and it's been defeated, so we'll see where it goes.
Come on, Washington lawmakers, get on this. This needs to change like yesterday, don't you think? I don't know, I'm feeling a lot of emotions after watching that story. Why doesn't she just move out?
It's a good question. She faces a challenge that a lot of low-income renters face, is that they'd want to move out, but you think about it, you've got first and last month's rent oftentimes, a deposit. In this case, she also has to move her belongings, which is challenging in her physical condition, and she's got 2 dogs. So to find an environment that would be suitable for her, her dogs, her family, that's not easy.
Were all the units that bad in that mobile home park?
It's really a hodgepodge. So there's some kind of fifth wheel trailers, there's some RVs, some mobile homes that are not going to be moving anywhere. Her unit, though, is really, really bad. And I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, in all my years of reporting, I can't think of a more deplorable setting for a renter.
Yeah.
Just walking in there, the smell was so powerful, kind of a mix of chemicals and mold. It really was hard to breathe.
It's just very disturbing, yeah. And the fact that it's legal is...
Right. I checked in with her today as well, just to see if there's been any update.
Yeah.
She has been in contact with property management after we reached out.
Good.
They've talked about possibly fixing things or bringing in an RV for her to move, but nothing's happened so far. Additionally, she still does not have running water.
Wow. How that can be legal is beyond me. All right, thanks, Kyle, for bringing that to our attention. Holy cow. So now it's your turn. Let us know what you think about Casey's situation, will you? We know you have a lot to say. Now's the time. You can email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Right now, the city of Portland is going through its annual budget process, and it's a big undertaking this year. The city transition from the current form of government to a new one. So one thing that could be on the chopping block, at least in part, is the Portland Street Response Team. That's the program that reaches out to people who may be in crisis or who may be homeless and hanging out in a place where they're not welcome. The team responds to nonviolent calls as an alternative to police. but they're under the control of the city's Fire Bureau, led by Commissioner Rene Gonzalez, who's running for mayor. Gonzalez is now proposing cutting $3 million from the program. That's about a third of the budget for street response.
At the mayor's request, our public safety bureaus put together sort of a couple of different scenarios depending on what's available in the budget for them this coming cycle. And it's partially in response to address a lot of the one-time money that underlies Portland Street Response and chat. It's also partially to address some of what we call structural deficits inside Portland Fire. Literally to continue operating as they are right now, they need more continuous authorization. So those two buckets. We got to deal with the one-time money problems, and we've got to deal with the structural deficit problems. Hopefully, we can find long-term revenues for Portland Street Response and for Portland Fire's core operations that won't necessitate these cuts. Portland Street Response, we're going to the Joint Office on Homelessness in the county. We're going to continue to fight that fight to find stabilized funding for them indefinitely. But unfortunately, they were built with a lot of one-time dollars. And in response to the mayor's direction for budget prep, we had to play through scenarios where there isn't new ongoing money to replace that one-time money.
So that's what he's thinking. Now, we wanted to hear from some people who've had direct interaction with Portland Street Response. We talked with a couple of homeless people. They kind of had mixed reviews.
Street response is one of the most important resources out here for people on the streets. I know I personally don't use it near as much anymore now that I've gotten into a shelter. But back when me and my wife were sleeping in tents, we would see street response all the time, and they would definitely be someone that we would not always look forward to seeing, since they're usually part of the people involved in the sweeps. But if not part of that, that was usually a very helpful resource.
Stuff that I do see going on now, like through the other companies that have resources and been providing to us homeless, like the Blanchet House. They feed us 3 meals a day, give us clothes on some days. Don't get me wrong, I forget my days, but yeah. So in other terms, in other aspects, I would personally say for us homeless out here, there is better resources than the Portland Street Response.
All right. At the same time, there are folks fighting hard to keep the program fully funded and to expand it so that they can respond to people 24 hours a day. A group called Friends of Portland Street Response started a petition that now has about 12,000 signatures. Let's take a look at some of the calls Portland Street Response goes on. Since they were formed, they've been called out more than 19,000 times. According to their data in 2023, that's the red line, they responded to about 1,000 calls a month. Most of those calls are in downtown Portland. You can see the brighter area in the map here, but they do go all over the city. About 65% of the people they encounter are homeless. They're called out to help with all kinds of things: medical concerns, falls, mental health crisis, overdoses, and assaults. At this week's budget work session, Portland City Commissioner Carmen Rubio, who's also running for mayor, said she wants to fund the Portland Street Response with money from the Portland Clean Energy Fund.
I'm very interested in working with our city budget office on this, and specifically to look at the earned interest on the collected and confirmed PSEF surcharge revenue, specifically for this time while we're looking for more funding to stabilize it for the long term. And I want to be clear, it's entirely independent from the resource funds of PSEF. This is very discrete funding, and I'm proposing a minimum of maybe $3 million as a one-time allocation for Portland Street Response to make sure that it has the runway that we need together to kind of figure out what happens and how to stabilize it for the long term.
Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler says he's, quote, happy to have that conversation. And today the Oregonian is reporting that Gonzalez wants to use $12 million of that same fund to pay for street response and other Fire Bureau needs. He did tell us that cutting money from the program is only one proposed scenario and that different things can happen as the city works through this budget process. So, again, we want to know what you think. What should the future of Portland Street Response look like? We want to hear from you. Here's our contact info again. The email is thestory@kgw.com, or you can call and leave a voicemail. The phone number 503-226-5090. Speaking of budgets, Oregon's lawmakers found out today they're going to have hundreds of millions of dollars more to spend this legislative session. They're going to dig into the revenue forecast, and so are we. It shows some interesting things about what's happening in our state. For instance, less money coming in from alcohol and marijuana sales. We'll explain when this story returns. Let's take a moment now and talk money and politics. Oregon lawmakers learned this morning that they will have tons more money to spend than expected during this current short session. And by more, I mean $558 million more. Now, that money is a combination of $76 million more than expected in corporate income taxes, plus $482 million that were set aside for the last two-year budget cycle, but not spent by the agencies. So that money then gets scooped up and moved into the current two-year budget cycle. That's likely good news for lawmakers who want to spend lots on housing and mental health and several other programs. The update came in the form of the March revenue forecast. Don't email. I know it's not March. I have no idea why they call it that, but they do. Anyway, here's Oregon's economist Mark McMullen on the left and economist Josh Lehner on the right, briefing lawmakers this morning in Salem. They have lots of charts that help explain what's happening. Basically, Oregon and the nation appear to be making a soft landing as we come down from high inflation. And Oregon's economy is really relatively stable. I thought this graph was interesting. It shows that the state is, well, pretty much out of workers, that pretty much everyone who wants a job has one. I'll let Josh explain.
The chart on the left is kind of looking at that like demographically adjusted, age adjusted employment rate. So relative to, you know, what share of the population that historically you would think would have a job or at least be in the labor force looking for a job, what share of them actually do have a job. So it's not the unemployment rate, it's the employment rate. And you can see we're basically near an all-time high. The only time in our recorded history where we see a slightly higher percentage of Oregonians with a job was back at the height of the tech boom in the late 1990s. And so again, we're in a cyclically strong labor market. The number one reason why local businesses are having a hard time hiring workers or finding workers is because nearly everybody has a job already.
How about that? That other chart there on the right, by the way, shows the big number of baby boomers that are retiring. The economists say those two factors, most everybody working and baby boomers retiring, well, those two will continue to make it harder for companies to find workers in Oregon. They also pointed out that there are more deaths than births in Oregon each year. Did you know that? Kind of interesting. So without people moving in here, we're kind of in trouble. They also lowered their expectations for that in-migration, as it's called, from 0.7% per year to 0.6% per year. It's not a big change, but I did some quick back-of-the-napkin math, and if there's 4 million people in Oregon, it means there's roughly 24,000 people a year that are moving into Oregon now instead of 28,000 a year. But that does kind of make a difference over a long time. Another interesting point, most of the so-called vice revenue streams are expected to be lower than they thought last year at the close of the legislative session. That was last June. This is a slide from the presentation. It shows lottery will be up by about 16 million from the last estimate in June, but everything else down. I highlighted the changes there on the right so it's easy to follow. Economists now think that tobacco sales will be down about $56 million, which will mean $2 million less for mental health programs. Liquor sales will be down, way down, about $132 million less than expected just last June. That's going to mean more than $400,000 less for the mental health programs. And marijuana sales are expected to be down about $6 million, meaning roughly $6 million less for drug treatment programs. The economists said that there's still a lot of marijuana being sold, but the prices are low, and so it's going to bring in less tax to the state. Finally, the economists point out that Oregon currently has about $2.2 billion socked away in its rainy day fund, and that by the end of the current two-year budget cycle that runs until July of 2025, Oregon's going to have roughly $2.9 billion saved. Now that lawmakers are in session, they are planning on making changes to Measure 110. Right now, they're talking about recriminalizing drug use. Well, of course you did. You had a lot to say about that and ideas of your own.
They need to build a detox center, a recovery center that houses 1,000 people. What more do they need to know? What else is there to talk about? Nothing.
We'll take a look at your comments when we come back. Now let's get to some of your comments from our big story. Last night, state lawmakers spent the first day of the session talking about potential changes to Measure 110. One proposal, House Bill 4002, would classify the possession and use of many hard drugs as a Class C misdemeanor. So basically that would recriminalize them. People caught with the drugs would be given the opportunity to go to a deflection program. If they don't, they face 30 days in jail or a $1,200 fine. Here's what you had to say. James said, the people fined and put in jail will never pay the fines. Fines for people with no money don't work. And Greg asked whether the justice system would be able to handle recriminalization. Two questions. Do we have enough judges, public defenders, and jail cells to make recriminalization work? If not, what's the point? And a couple of viewers wondered whether that drug treatment would be available. Here's one voicemail we got.
They need to build a detox center, a recovery center that houses 1,000 people. What more do they need to know? What else is there to talk about? Nothing.
And V said treatment needs to go further, writing, what people need is life counseling, not just drug or alcohol, but total life counseling. And this takes time, sometimes years. This is what we don't want to realize as a society, that there is not a quick way to fix addiction. And Joanne left a voicemail saying the jail, fine, or treatment penalty does not go far enough.
I don't think C is enough. I really don't. It's wimpy. I think we need a little stiffer one, but I don't know that we need to go all the way. I'm just wondering, didn't our government system used to be where they got together and met in the middle?
All right, thanks for that. Let us know what you think about any of our stories. You can email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090. By the way, I've been reading your emails during the breaks tonight. You are fired up about the trailer park story that we started the show with, and good for you. Many of you have mentioned starting a GoFundMe account. If one of you do, let us know. Seems like it'd be a good project. Hey, in the meantime, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. Remember, the story, our collective story, that never ends. See you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.